This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co-host, Bill Hamill.
I'm somewhat more comfortable collecting real estate than I am collecting other stuff.
This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co-host, Bill Hamill. We just published our 100th episode recently, so excited to see the growth with the channel. Bill, what have you been up to recently? And as far as real estate
What have I been
goes?
up to? Well, I'm going to be racing to the 60-unit townhouse complex in Latham after this episode. And I'm actually, it's the first time that I've entertained, because we've done some remodels on our townhouses, which is great. You pull everything out, you put new in. Fairly simple, just expensive. And then I've done remodels where we are picking and choosing, okay, this is still in good shape. We can make this still appear updated and try to cut costs quite a bit because we're still getting a high rent. And our return on investment for that construction is better than doing the full remodels. So I'm going down to meet someone who professionally resurfaces older countertops. And I know it's going to be $900 or $1,000, so you're able to cut some cost. But I'm anxious to see what the quality of that is, based on either ripping out, putting in a Formica countertop or a granite countertop.
It's funny, I'm rushing to my 24 unit after this because they're doing the same thing with remodeling units, and some are doing the bathroom and the kitchen, some are just doing the kitchen, and some are getting turned over right now. And I'm thinking maybe we could just paint this and I can pro forma it out and see if it's even worth doing the kitchen, and is it worth doing that for every single unit right away. But today we interviewed Scott Krone from Coda Management Group. Scott has a very impressive real estate background. He's been in the industry for over 30 years. He started out with a single family home, got into multifamily, and now he is a self-storage expert. He's getting his portfolio to the point where he's going to be able to sell it to a REIT eventually. And I think that's should be the goal for all self-storage operators to get to that level and really have a brand.
Scott's gotten into
Bill,
a lot of different asset classes. Ultimately, he's done a great job of keeping it simple. That's why he got into self-storage. And he does all the proper research to see what areas need self-storage, the absorption rates and such. And he's mastered this space.
Yeah, a lot of operators feel like are flying day to day, figuring it out as they go. Scott seems very controlled. He knows his numbers. He knows his analysis of the different markets he's
Absolutely. And take advantage of Scott's offer. He's going to give that to us and our listeners, different analyzers to analyze self-storage opportunities.
Scott Krone from Coda Management Group, thank you for being here this morning. Very extensive background, a lot of history in the real estate industry. Excited to hear more about it. Can you start us off by telling us how you got into the real estate industry? Give us a background in your career.
Absolutely. I got into real estate because my parents showed up to my senior year in college for Parents Weekend and asked me what I planned to do. And I thought I was going to go into the family business. And they told me I would not be, which was a big shocker. And, I thought I pissed off grandpa or something like that, but found out that they were planning on selling the company. So that changed my trajectory of what we were going to be doing. I mean, this is a company that I was fourth generation. So it was a big change in our family. And my dad suggested that I rekindle my interest in architecture. And I thought I had closed that door by going to a liberal arts college, but they just had come out with a new program for a master's degree in architecture that was not supported by a bachelor's degree in architecture. So with a history degree, I was able to go get my master's in architecture. And through that, I got connected to my professor who was a real estate developer, architect, and builder, and focused mostly on multifamily. And that's how I got involved in real estate, because I was working on real projects while being in his studio.
Very interesting. Surprise, surprise, out of college. No family business for you, Scott.
Exactly.
So, getting into real estate at the beginning, I know it's been quite a while, quite a journey for you. What was your first purchase? What was your first experience with real estate?
Well, my first purchase was a condo that I lived in. We bought a little 750 square foot condominium that was pre-construction, and our goal was to flip it real estate every 2 years because they just came out with the new tax code that if you were married up to $500,000 was tax free. If you flipped it, you didn't have to put it back into real estate. So I began doing that. We did a little condo. We lived there for 2 years, and then bought another condo, lived there for a year. But my first business real estate purchase was a single family home. We bought a house for 350. We built a home for 300,000, 325, and we sold it for $1,050,000. And I had three investors, and they said, "Do it again and don't tell anybody." And it was at that point in time that I realized I was onto something, and I had to start telling everybody what we were doing. And so we in the next year we bought two more, the tear down and build new, and then after that we bought an acre, and we built 12 townhomes.
So townhomes, condos, single family homes, it's very impressive. But you mentioned multifamily with this, I think, professor. Where did that start?
Well, my master's thesis was a 400 unit, $100 million project. And so I was the TA, and fortunately for me, he picked my project to focus on for this development we were actually going to do. So my arrangement with him was, my first real estate negotiations, I should say, was he told me I had to work for him for free because I was his TA. And I said, well, my TA ship's only 20 hours. So after 20 hours, you have to pay me. And he reluctantly agreed to that. He wasn't used to having that sort of negotiation. And so from 7 in the morning until noon, I worked on the financials, all the development side of things. And then from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, I was working in studio for him. And then I'd go home, have dinner. And then from like 7 until midnight, I was doing homework for him. So basically from 7 a.m. until midnight, I was working on this project. So we did that for 3 years while I was in school. And then when I graduated, I continued working for him.
Well, amazing. How long did you work for him? I'm sure that was mind-blowing, that thesis of a 400 unit. Man, I envy that. I started off with a two-family home that I had to get a partner to even buy. And yeah, it was nice starting off my career with something. But geez, you started off practicing on a 400 unit.
It was when I really realized the risk in real estate. We were driving by the site with him, and I said it was an old Sara Lee factory where they used to make the bread and the pound cakes and all those sorts of things. It was 50 acres, and I said to him, "This is a lot of risk." And he looked at me and he goes, "You better believe it. When you're signing on it, it's a lot of risk." But it started off as 1,000 condominiums, and it got whittled down through the PUD process, the entitlement process, to 316 condos, 64 townhomes, and 16 single family homes. And so it was right across from where the Bulls practiced. So we actually had Bulls players renting the townhomes, and they would walk across, the ones that weren't Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, the guys who rotated in and out, they lived across the street.
What an incredible experience. Bill and I always say go bigger, faster, and it's hard to wrap your head around numbers that go into a 400 unit purchase, from the underwriting to the monthly mortgage that you're going to see that large number. Like you said, you're signing your name for that. But when you start off with that, it makes you realize that kind of purchase is possible if the numbers work, and it does involve risk. As any good entrepreneur, any good investment is going to have risk to see that upside. And the fact that you're working from 7 to 12 every day, and you have to enjoy it to put in those hours, but that's how you get good at it.
Well, I recognize that it was a period of my life, right, where I could learn a lot, and then I could use that to propel myself to do something else. But I mean, keep in mind, this is early 90s where, a quick funny story for you. I was working on my computer, and it was all in Quattro Pro. Bill, you might remember what Quattro Pro is, but it was the precursor to Excel. And the file was getting so big that I would sit there and, I'd hit return, and then it would take 5 minutes to process. And I would just be sitting there waiting. You don't know when it's going to finish processing to move to the next cell. And he walked by, and then he goes get some coffee, and he walks by, and I'm still sitting there, and he goes, "Why aren't you working?" I said, "I am working. I'm waiting for the computer to respond. I just can't do anything until the computer responds." And he looks at me, and he goes, "Does this happen frequently?" And I said, "Every time I move the cursor, it does this." And he walked into his office, and then the vice president got called into his office, and then the vice president comes out, and 2 days later, I had the biggest, floor computer that they could find that had the most capacity. And I did all of the financial analysis on a spreadsheet, and it was not only what was projected, what was sold, what was the buyer change order. Then I had to break it down by unit type, by square footage, so we could track what percentage within a building, but also overall was selling. And then if something needed to be changed, we could tweak it. And so he had me put up, on like 15 different blueprints on his wall, the entire development. And I'd have to go and label all the price next to it. And then every time we changed it, I'd have to pull it off and put another price on it and stuff. And so this was very old school, before computers really, integrated and took over. But I did it all pretty much on a spreadsheet.
A little different than the underwriting software we're using today. You mentioned getting your undergraduate at a liberal arts school. Where did these underwriting and math skills come from? Is that something you always had, or were you learning it as you were underwriting this huge project?
Well, I learned spreadsheets, while working on it. But because in college we didn't even have spreadsheets. So, but I did take a lot of math. I took a lot of physics. I took a lot of poli-sci. I took, it was a good liberal arts education. So I got a very vast diversity. But that was the reason why I got put on the financial side, because all of my, fellow workers, they were all architects. So they were all drafting. I could read and write. So they put me on the development side.
What I find interesting, and I'm sure Steven's experiencing it now, when you're just starting off and you buy a larger asset and you have a lot of work to do, a lot of value add construction, and you're starting off on that 400 unit and you're doing the financial analysis. Understanding, yes, you had some architecture education, but what is your experience? What does it look like when you're doing a financial analysis on that development project for the 400 unit, coming up with construction costs and building materials, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it's very similar to how we do it now. When we're working on our self-storage, at that point in time, keep in mind, the 400 unit was not his first development. He had been working for 20, 25 years at that point in time. And it's similar to what we do now, is that we have 30 years of data to go back and look at and compare. So when we see the price escalation that we saw this past year, that's not the first time I've seen that. It's probably the third or fourth time that I've seen it in the marketplace. So we use those as key performance indicators, and we go back and reference previous projects to determine what we project our future projections are going to be. So the question begins, if you've never done it, or if you haven't done it with somebody else, where do you get that information from? And I think when I was coaching real estate for a while, I would tell people, get to know a contractor and get them on their team and get pricing from them, because that's where you're going to get the best information, is people who are doing it, that have the database of knowledge and experience to give you cost for, a projection. When we're designing let's just say a house for a client, we put together a budget at the beginning, but I'll say to them, this is our budget. Are we going to agree upon this budget? Because of the fact that when we look at something, you haven't made selections. We haven't finalized the design. We haven't even started the design. So how can anybody give you an exact cost of these things until we have the design, until we have the selections, and we put it out to market to bid it? And so that is, we have to base upon our experience.
It's a great point as far as pricing and having everything in a row before you get that job price. First, you mentioned single family homes, then condos, then townhouses, then multifamily, and now it's self-storage. Is self-storage your primary focus today?
Yeah, we sold off all of our multifamily back in, I think it was 18. I thought we were at the peak of the market. And I mistimed that one, but I got out on the front end rather than the back end. But we have been doubling down on self-storage. So we develop, we design, we build, and then now we actually also manage self-storage. So we created our own brand, One Stop Self-Storage. We did that in response to the marketplace, but we've been developing a portfolio. And the main difference in why we've done it is, it's very similar to multifamily. Think about it. We're renting a box, right? It's just how sophisticated and how developed this box is. Does it have a kitchen, or does it have nice finishes, or is it just simply a box? So we classify self-storage as multifamily without toilets and without tenants. And as a result of that, it's a fraction. Our development costs are 10% of multifamily, and our operational expenses are 25 to 35% compared to 55%. But what we also like about it is it's a retail business. And so we can analyze the retail business and the supply and the demand needs within a community a lot more so than we could with multifamily. So for us, we can underwrite it and we can stress test it and do the due diligence a lot more accurately than I could with multifamily.
So was it your experience in multifamily? Because that's what I've done for forever. That's my specialty. And it gets interesting sometimes. I self-managed for a long time. So you're dealing with, what do they say, tenants, toilets, maintenance technicians, and it can get interesting on a daily basis. So was it your experience in multifamily with all those facets that gave you that aha moment to say, hey, I need more simplification, so I need to go from multifamily to something different like self-storage?
Well, keep in mind that when I got into self-storage, it was on the backside of the big recession, the major recession, or the Great Recession. And so everybody was being forced into multifamily because that was the only thing that banks could lend on. And we were beginning to see massive cap compression. So I was looking for something to buy into that I wasn't competing against the masses, because I couldn't see the value of buying something at a 5 cap and later trading at a 4 cap. It seemed like it was too risky. But when I saw the first time I got exposed to self-storage and I saw the demographics, when I saw the analysis that went behind it and the stickiness of it, and then I began studying it back and how it performed over the 4 previous recessions, it's an incredibly resistant asset class. And I deemed it recessionary resistant. A lot of people call it recessionary proof. I don't think there's anything proven in real estate other than when you expect to know it all, then the market will kick you in the butt. So I deemed it recessionary resistant because of how well it performs in recessionary markets. And that combination of things really attracted me to, lower cost basis, lower exposure. I have more rental units. I have more flexibility because I can change my unit configuration. But also I can study the market, and all those factors is what drove us into self-storage.
I've only been doing this for about 2 years, but it seems like self-storage has had this large increase in popularity, almost getting to this peak of demand. Do you see any oversaturation in the market?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, but that's the beauty of it, that the market for each facility is 3 to 5 miles. So, when we look at like predominantly the East Coast, Florida, Texas, the national average used to be 7 square feet of lockers per capita. If we were below that, we knew that we were buying into a good market. In those markets, we're seeing people build when it's 13 square feet per square foot, so it's almost doubled. So those are the markets that we're trying to avoid. So we always try to go into markets where the saturation is well below 7. And so we have properties from Milwaukee, Chicago, in Michigan, Louisville, Dayton, Toledo, in Kentucky. So, we're in Cleveland. So we're going in that direction. We're looking at those markets that are growing, but also have low saturation in terms of self-storage.
And I've watched self-storage blow up in the 30 years I've been in real estate, and I never delved in enough, didn't have enough interest because unfortunately, you can't look at certain things through your own lens. And I always looked at self-storage as people just storing their junk. And looking at it from my lens was, why would I pay $100, $150 a month to store stuff that's worth $1,000. So over a year's period of time, I'm paying more money in rent than what my junk is worth. And I've always looked at it from that standpoint, but also watched self-storage facilities skyrocket. And it seems like it just keeps going up and up. How did you look at it in the beginning to give you that confidence that it was the type of asset class that was going to continue to increase, that you could build your business with?
Well, when we first got into it, about 10% of the population was utilizing self-storage. And what we discovered within that was about 50% of those tenants are businesses. And so, people are using it. Now it's really taken off because, you go to the store and you might have to buy like 1,000, pipes of conduit because the next week they might not be in the store. So you're buying a ton and you're putting it in your locker just so that you can keep your business going, or electrical boxes or whatever it may be. So 50% of our tenants are actual businesses. The other component of it is the fact that the way in which people use self-storage has changed, but the underlying concept is that they're going through a challenge in their life. And so they're trying to address a change, which is painful. Okay. I mean, most change involves a little bit of pain, a little bit of challenge. And as a result of that, they're looking for a temporary solution in order to address that. So for instance, I'm getting divorced. I don't know what to do with all my stuff. I'm going to put it into self-storage. Or let's look at the pandemic. Everybody had to go back to where they were. They got kicked out of their schools. They had to put their stuff into self-storage. That's displacement. And then, if I'm moving abroad, whatever it may be, they're going through a change that is making it difficult in their life, and they want a temporary relief valve in order for them not to have to address this issue. What do I do with my stuff? I'm not ready to give up with it, but yet I'm going to take some time. I'm going to relieve the pressure. Then I'm going to come back to it and address it, and then do it. Our typical tenant stays 3 years. And so when we look at that, and then combined now with the pandemic, people are let's say in an apartment building, but they don't have the ability to increase because now rents are increasing dramatically or costs are increasing, but they can't expand. But now they need extra space because their kids are in school at their house or working from home, or it's become their gym. And so they need extra room, and self-storage provides that relief valve for them in terms of giving them a little bit more space without having to buy a bigger apartment, bigger house, those sorts of things.
I never knew that 50% of self-storage is from business, but it makes sense. Luckily, multifamily here in upstate New York, we have basements to store our supplies. But if we didn't have basements, I would need a locker for all the materials that we're getting.
Yeah, but you got to walk down the stairs, and it's just difficult to get to. So, there's a lot to say about those overhead doors and just backing your pickup truck in.
Absolutely.
Well, garages, attics, and basements are the killer to self-storage. Or if you're in Texas, a big backyard, right? Just go park your truck out in the backyard.
Or that one neighbor we all have that just leaves it all over their yard.
Yeah.
Do you have any other surprising facts like that about self-storage for someone that's not too familiar with the industry?
Well, for me, the big one was the fact that you could analyze it in terms of supply and demand, and we have software that we can draw upon. That if you give me any address in the United States, I can tell you what the market is. I can see what the supply index is. I can see what the rental rates are, and so we can analyze fairly quickly if the building is even worth pursuing or not pursuing based upon just general demographics and statistics.
Is that third-party software or something in-house?
No, it's third party. Yeah, we subscribe to it.
Well, we deal with evictions from time to time in the multifamily business, and it's fairly straightforward. New York has made it a bit more complicated than it needs to be, especially through the pandemic. But it's a process. It always has been. But normally, if someone doesn't pay, we're able to get them out of the apartment in 30 to 60 days, get our golden goose back, and re-rent that to a paying tenant. What is the eviction process, or what's the percentage of default in evictions and self-storage, and what's that process look like?
Well, it's completely different. I mean, that's another benefit of why we went after especially here in Chicago. why we went after self-storage versus apartments. I mean, it's so hard to evict someone here in the city of Chicago. They're not owner friendly, they're tenant friendly. And they've even passed laws that if you're not calculating the interest properly in terms of the deposit, they can sue the owner for every apartment tenant in the entire building. And so it's become very onerous to be an owner in the city of Chicago. For us, if they're not paying within 30 days, we can overlock their unit. So we can put a second lock on there. And, obviously they can't get access until they come and see us and address it. But after that, we can just put it up for auction. We can cut it and put the unit up for auction. And, you've seen Storage Wars. It's not that glamorous or exciting, but, it's like TV. It's pretty minimal, but I would say it's certainly less than 10%. Overall, I would say probably about 5% across the board.
Are those laws pretty consistent across the country with a 30-day?
Yeah, I've never seen any state that had problems with eviction on self-storage facilities, because you're not evicting someone from their house,
Right.
So you're not impacting their ability to survive.
And then all it takes is they haven't paid in 30 days. You just slap a lock on that locker.
Yeah. I mean, if we really need to get hold of someone, like for instance, something that is not, let's just say not payment designated, we can put a lock on it, and that forces them, like if we can't get hold of them, like we need to update their contact information, or, we need to do something with their unit or whatever it may be, as soon as we put a lock on it, because if we don't have the ability of reaching them, they come see us because they want to get access to their stuff, and it's like, hey, why'd you overlock us? And, oh, we just needed to talk with you. We couldn't get hold of you. Thanks for coming in. So that's that sort of thing.
So you mentioned having these softwares that tell you which markets are the best right now, the per capita, per square foot. What markets are you focusing on at the moment?
We're focusing on the flyover states. So we're not technically, we are in Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky. We have a facility in Virginia and Maine. And so and we're building in North Carolina and Florida. So those are the markets that we're focusing in on.
So are there specific states that have, a higher demand for self-storage than others? Is that what you're looking at in picking different markets?
Well, based upon, the saturation levels, for sure, like Florida, Texas, California, the East Coast have really high demands. That's why they're over, 7 square feet per locker. Their East Coast is around 9, Florida's at 13. Texas is very high as well, but you have to be careful, because if you go to rural Texas, there's not as much demand, because again, you have a big backyard, big front yard. You don't need it, right? But it's the type of, that's where we have to understand. We look at that specific demographic to see what the market is. And so, where you have a lot of space, that's where people tend not to need as much self-storage. But that's also, conversely, that's where people are storing their adult toys, whether it be an ATV, a snowmobile, a jet ski, or a boat, that's where people use it. So in Michigan, we're developing a facility that is climate controlled self-storage plus boat and RV parking, because there's a big boating and camping community. They would have these big RVs that they need to park them.
How has your architecture degree helped you with the self-storage? You mentioned developing these facilities. Are you doing anything unique with these developments?
Well, a lot of the buildings that we bought are old, underperforming commercial buildings, which we've converted into self-storage. So my understanding of, getting a property through the entitlement process, through the zoning process, coming up with a design that, aesthetically meets what the criteria is for the community, plus also the use. So it's the combination of my development background, my architectural background, and the contracting background that we can put together this whole performance, this whole development of, for new development and new self-storage facilities.
And hearing you saying you're developing climate control, I've seen that all over the place as well. I'm assuming there's going to be a much higher rent rate for climate control self-storage. Talk about that a little bit, and maybe here's a loaded question: is what's that next innovative idea for self-storage?
Well, the big reason why people want climate control is that humidity is the killer of furniture, right? So if you have a facility that's going from, minus 20 degrees to 100 degrees, which could happen in Michigan and Chicago. You see this big fluctuation. You go in to get your furniture and it's cracked or split or separated, all those sorts of things. So climate control is, keeps your stuff in a lot better condition. Now, what we have is we're taking old commercial buildings, like our one in Chicago is the original Lincoln Log Factory. And then in Wisconsin, it was the first fireproof building in Milwaukee. In Toledo and Dayton, the same sort of things. In each of those things, we're building a building where you actually drive into it, the door comes down, and now you're unloading in a dry, safe, and secure environment as opposed to being outside in the environment. And so you can, leave your car unlocked, you can roll your stuff to your locker, and your stuff's safe. And so that's the advantage of it. A lot of people are saying, is it going to go to the model of where they bring it to you? You call them up and you tell them, I want this box taken away, or I want this tennis racket, or whatever it may be. And then they ship it out far away, and then they leave it in a self-storage facility. And when you need it, you call them and they bring it to you. To me, that is a self-storage model, but inherently that's a logistics model, because now you're dealing with transportation and trucking and in circulation, all those sorts of things, which is a vastly different thing. So that is, to me, it's a logistics company, not a self-storage company. The other one would be cold storage. Cold storage has really taken off, and it has a greater efficiency because of the fact that it's all automated. And, right now our circulation is, 5 feet, and they can break that down to the size of a pallet. And so the pallet, will go directly in there and it'll be lifted up and then inserted into a rack, if you will. And so there's greater efficiencies because the circulation is reduced and it's all automated. So it's a very similar model, but it adds like another $15 million of technology in order to move these pallets. But cold storage is huge demand right now because of the fact that, people are, having more and more things delivered to their home, and they need shipping and they need things cold when it's delivered.
I do like that model where they take it away for you. It's almost like a luxury self-storage that does have a large logistics focus. Most of our listeners, I'd say, are in the multifamily industry. Do you have any proven strategies from your experience in multifamily, similar to the ones that you're explaining now for self-storage, that work for you?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I always learned in multifamily was what's your cost per door, right? You have to understand your model and breaking it down per unit type, and then understanding what the market is for that specific unit. And so what we always looked for when we were developing multifamily was making sure that we had a gradual increase in unit sizes. If you're buying a small building, let's call it under 20, and there's only, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, you don't have a lot of variation. But if you have the ability to make sure that you have, like, let's call it a 750 square foot unit, an 850, a 950, so that you have, and then it would be like a bell curve. So your greatest number would be the 2 bedrooms in the middle, and then you'd have your 1 bedrooms and your 3 bedrooms on the sides. But the more variation that you have in a configuration, the more flexibility, the more that you can offer people. The other thing would be what distinguishes your building from the next. When we had them, we tried bringing in Wi-Fi. We tried bringing in, internet to our building and cable TV. But we found out that everybody wanted the cable TV, but no one wanted the internet. And I said, well, why don't you want the internet? And they're like, we don't have computers. So it wasn't, so it was like learning what the market is and then offering things that distinguish your building from other buildings. And you might think like, well, you're renting an apartment. Sure. But ultimately you have to have a brand that distinguishes your brand from other people's brands. So it could be, I used to always give my tenants a Thanksgiving ham and a Thanksgiving turkey. And then one year I went to go give them a Christmas ham and they're like, where's my Thanksgiving turkey? They began to expect it. I'm like, well, I thought I'd give you a Christmas. They're like, no, we want the turkey. For them, Thanksgiving was a bigger holiday than Christmas, and they were counting on that turkey. So every, Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we show up at the building with my kids and gave everybody a turkey.
That's funny. That's my history too. When I was 21, just starting off, and I developed a portfolio little by little up until, 26, 27. I only had probably 7 or 8 buildings where we used to hand deliver turkeys around Thanksgiving, and it was relatively simple. And it went over very, very well, but we continued to accumulate more and more units. And it got to a point where, I used to be the maintenance guy too. We used to do everything. So now we have, say, 30, 40 units, and we have a Econoline van filled with turkeys that we're hand delivering to our tenants. And it got to a point where I felt like half of them weren't home. So we have these turkeys thawing out in our van. It's like, okay, this isn't making sense anymore. And then we went to the simplified gift card version of our tenant gifts. As you were explaining the self-storage, and I'm assuming a lot of them with the climate control, they have power. So as a property manager for so long, I'm thinking of the surprises. What's the screening process like to get a $200 or a $300 storage locker? And how many times, or has it happened where you have people who are choosing to live in one of those lockers?
Well, the first thing I correct you on is none of them have power. So that is the reason why we don't have power, is that it makes it harder for people to live in it. The other thing is we have cameras, and so we track all those different things to make sure that they're not living in them. It has happened. It does happen, especially when they're climate controlled and it's winter in Milwaukee or Dayton and it's cold outside, and you got a guy coming in, a person coming in to do it. And but we know that very quickly on, and when you see an extension cord running down the hallway and into a unit, that's a pretty good indicator. So that's when we say thank you for coming, but have a nice day. That's an immediate eviction if we catch someone living in a unit.
It's funny because I have a 12-unit building with 4 outbuildings, I call them, which are basically storage spots. And I'll have some people that reach out on the rental market and say, hey, can I live in this spot? Where I'm like, what property owner would actually say, hey, yeah, let's talk about this? Or I'm like, it's a quick no. Imagine renting someone to live in your garage rental or the barn that I'm renting. But what's that screening process for you on self-storage? Because I've never done a lot of self-storage, so I feel like I'm so inexperienced when I'm renting my outbuildings at this property. And I'm confused on how stringent I should be, because normally with apartments, we're checking credit, we're checking landlord references, employment, doing a little bit of a Google search, making sure that we can learn about these people. How stringent do you have to be when someone's renting a $150 storage locker?
Well, even if it's a 25 square foot facility, right? We're not doing all those different things. During our process, we train our staff to go through questions to find out what they're intending to use it for, and how we can best serve them. I mean, because we see that, again, they have an issue, they have a problem in their life, and we're trying to solve that problem for them. So, during that process, we're just getting to know the people to understand why they are desiring to rent a self-storage. It could be, I'm in between apartments, I need it for 3 months, or, I'm remodeling our house, and, they bring in 8 moving vans of furniture and they rent up 10 units at one time for 9 months. So during that process, you get to know them, but we don't have to run credit. We don't have to do tenant references, because again, the process to get them out is a lot simpler, that it's not worth the time and the energy to do all those things, especially if they're paying $25, $30, $40 a month. When we have 1,000 units, $40 or $50, even $100 a unit, it's the eviction process is much easier. So there's not as much to risk.
Yeah, there's the answer right there. Yeah, so if you can just slap a lock on someone's locker after 30 days, yeah, there's not much risk to someone hanging around in that space. No, that makes perfect sense. I'm seeing that you've mastered this self-storage business. Are you going to stay in that lane and just continue to take advantage of this asset class, or are you looking at doing something different, getting back into multifamily, maybe some retail? I know you did a little bit of athletic space at one point.
Yeah, we do have that currently. We still have that. I've been in real estate long enough to know that the market is always changing, right? and I'm a developer. And so my motto is everything's for sale at the right price. But inherently what we're trying to do is build this portfolio to sell the portfolio to a mid-level REIT, so we can get greater cap compression. And so that's ultimately our plan. And if I hold on to a couple facilities in terms of cash flow for passive income, that's the main objective.
Stephen, I've been staring at this hat that Scott's wearing with this cursive L on there. I'm wondering what that represents.
That's the University of Louisville. So they're one of our neighbors of our newest facility that we're developing right now. And so we always like to support our local community. So now that it's the fall seasons, students are coming back to school and they have football and women's soccer and all these different things. We want to do a shout out to the University of Louisville for their upcoming season, and we like to support our local schools and colleges and teams and programs. So a lot of our facilities are near minor league teams, and we like to give shout outs to them as well.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I like to support that minor league baseball team in the capital region of New York. They've got a great facility, and even going and watching independent baseball, boy, they still play at a super high level, and it's great to watch, and it's a great night out. Scott, this is the Collecting Real Estate podcast. They say you have to have 3 of something to make a collection. So we've got 3 questions to wrap this up. First one for you is, in 5 words or less, what's the most important thing you learned since you started collecting real estate?
Patience.
Perfect. Our first one-word answer. I love
it. Easy. You said 3 words. I figured I would lower it down to 1. One. I come from the Misesian School of Architecture. Less is more, right?
And so funny because you're in self-storage where you have the most simplified asset class. So he gives us the most simplified short answer.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of people out there that promote and educate that, real estate's a quick get rich quick scheme. Not scheme, but process. I've never experienced that. I've never seen that. It takes time. You got to let the asset develop. You got to let it mature. It takes patience. And if you're not in it for the long haul, then it's the wrong field for you.
Yeah. I think any investment, patience. I know people getting into crypto, getting rich quick, and then losing it as fast as they gained it. Second question for you is, what are your 1 to 2 year personal goals? Personal, not business.
Yeah, well, I'm in the midst of a 2-year program that I've been doing on transformation and leadership. So I joined this program where we meet quarterly and retreat, and we do homework in between. It's all about developing myself personally in order to become a better leader. And so I recognize if the company was going to continue to grow, that I needed to continue to grow. And so I'm in the midst of that program, which is called the Transformation Center.
Awesome. Love that. Last question for you, Scott, is how can we and the listeners assist you? How do we contact you?
If anyone does, and they reach out and they mention this podcast, we will give them some information on self-storage. One, we'll give them a feasibility report. So that's a third-party report that we go and hire. That they study the market, they study that specific property to determine whether or not they feel it's good or bad. And it's a great report. It's like 175 pages. It's about our project in Dayton. And it tells why we went into that market. So we will give that to anybody who references this show when they email us. And the other thing we'll give is a self-storage analyzer. And so you can compare it to your multifamily to see the pros and cons of both and see the differences and the distinctions between the 2 models. So we will give those 2 gifts to your listeners, but they can get hold of us at info@Coda, CODAMG.com. That's info@CODAMG.com.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm asking you how we can assist you, and you just gave some serious value to us and our listeners. We appreciate that. And you've been a fantastic guest on the Collecting Real Estate podcast, and thanks again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.